The Barbarian, a fan favorite ever since the launch of Diablo II. The sons and daughters of Bull Kathos are coming back in a big way with Diablo IV, and I'm going to show you my ultimate Hammer of the Ancients or HotA build. In this video, I'm going to break down a member of our team, Smog's HotA build. This is a similar build to what I showcased last week as a theory crafted build, but today I'll be showing off actual gameplay of this build as well as some modifications to it. Keep in mind the footage is from a level 35 Nightmare Dungeon, which is a level 89 mob compared to Smog's level 73, so just absolutely girthy. So we'll start out by going over the leveling version of this build, then discuss the post-level 50 endgame version, pivoting into aspects and gear choices, then closing the video out by showing off the build and my thoughts on it as it pertains to both leveling and endgame. If this is your first time on my channel, the way I do things here is by upfronting the knowledge in my video so you can decide if it's the right one for you. So you can find the entire build as well as how I approach each level from 1 to 50 in the description and pinned comment. The Google Doc will break down each and every level for skill selection. It's got all of my leveling builds in there, so go ahead and have at it. Just use it as a cool reference guide. But with the most recent patch, the Barbarian did get a slight nerf with the Chieftains aspect, but the class is still disgustingly good, as you will see. You can quickly navigate to any part of the video that interests you the most using the chapters in both the timeline and the description. Lastly, please don't forget to follow me on Twitch, where I will be streaming Diablo IV all week with all of the juicy drops. You can find a link to that in the description and pinned comment as well. Let's get started here on our Barbarian HotA build for Diablo IV. So I'm going to use D4 builds to show off the leveling here. It's easier for me to kind of right click and remove things from this to kind of explain stuff. If you want to just jump to the gameplay, it's at the end of the video. You can find that in that chapter below. So when we're starting off in a leveling situation, and you can find an exact detailed breakdown of how I approach each one of these skills in that pinned comment. But we're going to go with Lunging Strike. It's going to give us a little bit of mobility, but it's going to allow us to hit some good damage in here. So it's going to increase that damage and heal you for 2% max when hit and it damages a healthy enemy. And it also inflicts bleeding. Bleeding is going to be crucial here, and I'll explain why in a bit. Now, our big bread and butter is going to be Hammer of the Ancients. Keep in mind, this is a 50% lucky hit. It is going to become a bomb once we properly modify it with some aspects. We're going to enhance Hammer of the Ancients so that it gains 3% more fury for 5 seconds for each enemy damage, which is always great. It's taxed up to 10 times because you want fury generation with this. It's going to come back to that in a bit. Now, it deals 1% additional damage for each point of fury you had when using it. So maxing your fury is huge because you get a huge damage bonus from this Furious Hammer of the Ancients. We're going to pick up this for some more fury generation because you're kind of weapons. And then we're going to go with 2 shouts. We're going to go with Rallying Cry, which is going to increase our movement. It's going to make us unstoppable, and it's going to help generate both fury and resource generation increase. That's huge for us. Then we're going to use War Cry here to increase damage dealt, and it's also going to give us Berserk automatically. And it's also going to fortify us for 15% base life. We're going to come back to that into the end game, but it's a pretty crucial thing that we're going to benefit here in some of our passives. Booming Voice is going to increase the duration of these shouts because the shouts basically turn you into just a bomb. The Raid Leader here gives it an actual heal applied to the shout, which is nice. And then Guttural Yell is going to make it so that enemies deal 12% less damage. For your movement ability, you're going to go with Leap on down to Enhanced Leap, and the big one here is Power Leap because then it's going to gain 40 fury for you. So it's just a really nice way to give you a bit of fury when you're going through the leveling process and a really good movement capability. You're going to get Aggressive Resistance to help out for 9% DR while berserking, and while berserking your fury generation is increased by 18%. So you're going to get a lot of benefit from being berserk, which War Cry is going to auto berserk you for 4 seconds. It's quite nice. Also pick up swiftness because it's cool movement speed. But you're going to get Pit Fighter here to deal increased damage to close enemies and gain DR to distant enemies. And No Mercy is going to help increase crit chance against immobilized, stunned, or slowed enemies. The big one here though is Hamstring. So your bleeding effects now slow enemies by 10%. And I'm going to show you how that explodes in just a little bit. We also have Thick Skin. Each time you take a direct hit, you gain 12% or 1.2% base life as Fortify. So you're constantly being fortified. Then our last thing here for while you're leveling is Call of the Ancients. And these guys are just going to pretty much one-shot bosses for you. I mean, that's hyperbole. They're just going to really do all the damage. They're going to just pour it on, and you can really push through the campaign or whatever you're doing from 1 to 50 very well with Call of the Ancients. We're going to respec out of that eventually, but it's a really nice one to have. And then heavy-handed here gives you an increased crit strike damage when you're using two-handed weapons. And lastly, we get with Unbridled Rage. So now our core skills deal 135% increased damage, but they cost 100% more fury. So we want that fury generation. And what's big here is that this is going to get a massive damage bonus, right? It's going to increase by 135%. But if we're over our fury, it's going to get that percentage increase. So you basically want to just get max fury and dump it into Hammer of Ancients. You use Lunging Strike on repeat until you have max fury and you dump on Hammer of Ancients. What the real big difference here between this build is and a Whirlwind build, and I'll exemplify this a little bit more in the gameplay, is that this build is more splashy, big, huge number damage. You're going to watch Smog play through the game and you're looking at 1.5, 2 million, 3 million crits very frequently. 1.5 million crits are very common in the latter portions of this build. Whereas Whirlwind is kind of consistent damage, but it really can't have really strong, hard splash damage against bosses. That's the big difference between the two builds, in case you were wondering. So how this really kind of puts together things with Hamstring is you're going to be using the ability to get a lot of generation from your shouts here and from pretty much using that hamstring capability to bleed things and do more damage to them. But the big thing that you want to focus on when you're leveling is Aspect of Ancestral Force. Hammer of the Ancients quakes outwards, dealing 32 to 50% of its damage to enemies. And actually, you know, this should be, if we are leveling, we want to do this. Because you do crit strike damage increase to crowd controlled enemies, all bleeding enemies are now slowed. So that's why you want these two things to work in conjunction with Hamstring, because you're basically going to be bleeding things left and right and doing increased crit damage to them. But Aspect of Ancestral Force is crucial here because it's going to allow you to do more damage in an area around you and do more damage. You put this on a two-handed slashing weapon. Because you're using Hammer of the Ancients, you will always be using a two-handed bludgeoning weapon. You put this on this and it gives you the effect on the bludgeoning weapon, and you never need to swap this off. You find this and you just slap it on a two-handed slashing weapon and you don't touch it. While you're leveling, you're swapping off your bludgeoning weapon every 5-6 levels to just get the max amount of damage possible. For our skills here, this is what you're going to go with. This is what we talked about. But your technique too, you want two-handed sword because 20% of direct damage you deal is inflicted as bleeding damage. Remember, that is all going to slow things down, right? And you're going to do more damage to it while you're leveling. There are two aspects you want to focus on here, are Aspect of Echoing Fury and the Bold Chieftain's Aspect. Those are the two big ones you want to focus on when you are going through the leveling process. But let me pivot this now and talk about your gear as a whole. So this section is going to be the same for both leveling and endgame. What you really want to focus on, again, just to reinforce my point, is Ancestral Force. You're going to use it from level 1. Well, you're probably going to get this around like 15, 16, 20, whatever. But from when the point you get Ancestral Force all the way to level 100. This is your bread and butter. It turns the build on, more or less. So you need this aspect immediately. You get it in Skosklin right there in Act 2, so it's quick to get to. Then the next two are a bit trickier. Kyrgyzstan is much further into the game, so you're going to want to hopefully get that as fast as you can. Then Bold Chieftain's Aspect. So the reason these two are important, so whenever you cast a shout skill, its cooldown is reduced by 1 to 2 seconds per nearby enemy up to a max of 6 seconds. So this makes your cooldown of your shout skills substantially lower, and you're going to have 3 shout skills when you have max level. So this allows you to pretty much turn on the damage battery that supplies tons of punishment to everything that you're just punching in the face. So you need to get this ASAP. And it is a drop aspect. So what that means is you need to use your oobles and you need to roll. And since it's also a ring aspect, you need to use your oobles on rings to find this, or just find it on a ring and put it on the ring and put your ring on and just never touch it. Never touch it until you get to beyond 50 where you can find a better ring to swap off or rip the aspect off and put it on. But basically you want to always make sure this is on. And this, like I said, you'll get in Kyrgyzstan, but it can also drop as well. So your shouts now generate 2 to 4 fury per second while active. It is a constant fury battery for you, thus supplying further damage to your badass Hammer of the Ancients. For our other aspects here, we have Ghostwalker, which is a really good one to help with movement. For our defensive ones, we've got 3. Protecting aspect here, so while you're healthy, a magical bubble gives you immune. If you've completed Axe 1, you got this on an amulet, and it's quite good. I like it. There is an alternative you can choose here, and it is the aspect of the protector. But I think protecting aspect works a little bit better because it gives you guaranteed immunity in the times in which your shout is not up. I think it's really good. Aspect of Numbing Wrath is also crucial because each point of fury generated while at max fury grants Fortify, thus keeping you alive. This really is going to be crucial as you see some of the gameplay because you can get really wild with your health. Another one here is Aspect of Might. So basic skills now grant 20% damage reduction for 2 to 6 seconds. You get this in the dry steppes. It's a nice way to get some good DR on, and it's a really good place to put it on your pants. Outside of that, though, we have all of our offensive aspects. We have quite a few. So Aspect of the Expectant. Attacking enemies with a basic skill increases the damage of your next core skill by 5 to 10%, up to 30%. So using your lunging strikes, you're going to build this thing up and then add that 30% damage into your Hammer of the Ancients. And then Edge Master's aspect. Remember, we're getting tons of our primary resource, Fury, right? So skills deal up to 10 to 20% increased damage based on your available primary resource when cast, receiving the maximum benefit while you have full primary resource. So basically, you want to get this all the way up to 100 max Fury, right? Because you drop a bomb with all these damage bonuses from Expectant here, from Aspect, from all of your skills we've talked about up to this point, tons of juicy things. And then Aspect of Might here is, Devilish Aspect. After generating 100 Fury, which you're going to do, right, your next core skill creates a Dust Devil that deals X damage to enemies behind the target. Now, this seems underwhelming, but I really want you to know that what's really good about this is it does a high amount of damage, and it's a kind of passive bit of damage that's going to rip around the battlefield to maybe hit anything that's ranged, giving you a little bit more breathing room while you're moving around the battlefield. It's a really good aspect that not many people are talking about, but I think it plays so well with how this build works because you are constantly putting yourself to a 100 Fury. You're not draining it midway through or at the bottom. You're just constantly hitting 100, so you might as well get this very high damage Dust Devil. You also get Aspect of Ancestral Force. We already talked about that. Whoopsies. Aspect of Limitless Rage. Each point of fury you generate while at max fury grants your next core skill 1 to 2% damage, increased damage up to 15 to 30%. Now, you won't get the majority of the benefit from this, so you're not going to sit there and sit on fury, right? That's wasted Hammer of the Ancients technically. But what you will do is anytime you have excess fury, you're going to just have a stronger Hammer of the Ancients. And since you're always kind of riding that line between max fury, this is not to be confused with like a movie, right? Max Fury Escape from Thunderdome or whatever. This is really going to just help you out for fury generation and turning that fury generation right into a big bomb for yourself. Now, our last one here is Aspect of Retribution. Distant enemies have an 8% chance to be stunned for 2 seconds when they hit you. You deal 20 to 40% increased damage to stunned enemies. You will be stunning a lot. You will be stunning a lot when you get into the endgame build when I talk about your Paragon points in the Glyphs. But what this does too is distant enemies have an 8% chance to just be stunned. That's nice. So this gives you a little bit of breathing room whenever you're moving around the battlefield and distant enemies are trying to hit you. It has a chance to just outright stun them where you can then go ahead and mop and clean up. So this is what the build looks like here in the leveling stage. For the gems, armor, and jewelry, things are going to change once we pivot over to the endgame version. So the endgame version uses emeralds for crit strike damage to vulnerable enemies. Don't worry, I'll talk about that. And armor now is going to have damage reduction while fortified because you have that in spades, and you're going to maintain skulls. You want to have that good armor because you're going to be in melee range quite a bit, so you might as well take as much advantage of it as possible. If you jump to the note section, you do have some other things you can do here, some different things, some different helmet aspects that you can go with, which would then change into aspect of the conceited for your weapons and stuff like that. Pretty much anything that I've talked about that you maybe want to keep an eye on, it's here in the note section, so don't worry about it. If you miss it in the video, you didn't quite understand it, it's always going to be here for your reference, so don't worry about that. You can just jump into it. In fact, that's deleted because I've made 2 separate builds now, so we don't need this bit of information. But as it pertains to your gear, because I'm going to put this in the gear section, is Paragon points. So Paragon points and how this works. I'm not going to go through all these nodes and all these additional board attachments It's too long of an explanation in and of itself. But what I am going to talk about are the 3 rare glyphs you should focus on: Exploit, Wrath, and Martial. They are crucial for you. So the reason behind that is, let's go into Exploit. For every 5 dexterity purchase, you deal 1% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. But when an enemy is damaged by you, they become vulnerable for 3 seconds. It is a huge damage bonus. And now you have increased crit strike damage to vulnerable enemies. You just get so much out of it. You just get so damn much out of it. Martial is crucial here because after casting a shout skill, the active cooldown for every other shout skill is reduced by 1.2 seconds. So basically you cast the shouts in succession and it reduces them further. So it's really, really, really nice. And the other one's is Wrath, right? I had to make sure. And the last one here is Wrath, all the way at the bottom. So for every 5 dex purchased within range, core skills deal 1.5% increased crit strike damage, and skills that crit strike generate 3 fury. So basically you want to really make sure you are maximizing those dexterity to get all that crit damage. And it's why I put here in the notes, the only other bit about Paragon points I want to tell you is choose the new boards that provide enough nodes that are in range of the rare glyphs to maximize their benefits. If you don't know what that means because you're just leveling, then just skip this little bit of information and come back when you're level 50. Let's now go over the skill tree here of what level 50 looks like. So at max level, at level 50, we're going to change things up. We're still sticking with Lunging Strike. We're still sticking with our Hammer of the Ancients, but we're going to move around some of our passives and unactive. So we're ditching Leap altogether, and we're getting Challenging Shout. So you gain 40% DR from this. That's the big thing. And then it's also going to gain a 20% bonus max life. And then when it's active, you gain 3 Fury each time you take damage. So it's a huge Fury generator for you. We're going to max out Rallying Cry. So the resource generation is 56% versus 40%. A nice 16% increase there is a really good bonus. We have the same passes here, the same actives here. Nothing's changed. And everything is the same here. Pit Fighter and No Mercy. But the big thing here that has changed is that we've swapped Call of the Ancients on over to Wrath of the Berserker. So Explode into Rage, knocking back surrounding enemies and gaining Berserking and Unstoppable for 5 seconds. You saw what happens when we get Berserking, right? We get all these juicy passive bonuses, the damage reduction and the Fury generation. That's huge. For the next 10 seconds, dealing direct damage with basic skills grants Berserking for 5 seconds. So you just get tons of Berserk. While Wrath of the Berserker is active, gain 20% increased movement speed and increase Fury generation by 30%. While Wrath of the Berserker is active, every 50 Fury you spend increases Berserker's damage bonus by 25%. It is so good because you're dumping all of your Fury every 50. So you get this bonus because you're dumping 100 Fury every fucking time. And then for our passives, we added these 2 in here. So Wallop, your skills using bludgeoning weapons, which you will only be using because that's how you are doing your Hammer of the Ancients. Deal 15% increased damage if the enemy is stunned or vulnerable. Remember, that Paragon point, that Paragon glyph is how we're going to turn everything vulnerable. It's so huge for us. Then Concussion, Lucky Hit, skills using bludgeoning weapons have up to a 30% chance to stun enemies for 3 seconds, or up to a 45% chance when using a 2-handed bludgeoning weapon. Guess what? It's what we're using. So if you want to think of how that kind of factors itself out, because a lucky hit mechanic is kind of confusing. We have a 50% lucky hit here with a 45% chance of that triggering if lucky hit happens. It's roughly a 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 chance that this actually goes off and hits. And that's a pretty good chance to have something just get stunned. And what's important about this is this will trigger tons of stagger on bosses, allowing you to absolutely melt them because they take increased damage in that stagger state. If they're not a boss, they're just going to be stunned, and that's even better. So that concludes all the information for our HotA build. Let's jump into some gameplay. So the way this build really works is by using Lunging Strike to build up your Fury, and then you dump everything with Hammer of the Ancients. But you really want to use Lunging Strike to push yourself into a group of enemies and turn on all 3 of your war cries. You just 1, 2, 3 those, all 3 of your shouts. Sorry, war cry is a shout. You turn all 3 of them on, and then you just wallop things with your hammer. It sends out those little dust devils. You do tons of damage. And what I really want you to see here is on the points when that isn't active. When those shouts aren't active, and Smog deliberately wanted me to bring this up, is that those, you don't do a lot of damage. You really need your shouts to really be the staple of your damage. It's really a crucial thing. So what you want to do is, as you're using this, and as you see right here, don't hang around for stragglers. You got 1 or 2 enemies, just skip them. Push on and keep pushing into another group. Your shouts will be off cooldown. Put all of them on cooldown and just slam things apart with Hammer of the Ancients. You come across a whole bunch of pack of elites. That's when you pop Wrath of the Berserker and you go to town. It's important to note that because you don't want to be kind of stuck middling around with single enemy targets here and there, because your damage is not going to be impressive and you're going to feel like this build is kind of a wet paper towel. You don't want to feel like that. You want to feel like just a machine. And you get that by getting around a lot of enemies, which is going to help out with your chieftains aspect because it reduces the cooldown on all of your shouts and allows you to keep pummeling things to the ground. So I really recommend that this is, I really recommend this build. It is an amazing build. I love big damage numbers, and I think it's kind of one thing that makes the Barbarian particularly fun. If you think about the good old days of Diablo 2 Bone Crusher, you kind of get this style of this heavy hit, over the top style of big, bad, beautiful numbers. Now, like I said before, with the Whirlwind build, you get consistent damage distributed over a long period of time across a lot of enemies, but you don't get big burst damage. So when you fight against the elites or you fight against big bosses, your build starts to slow down, and that's kind of really unfortunate. This build will be strong getting to 50. It will definitely be strong on your march up. It will get even stronger though after 50, because I've really exemplified how those glyphs, turning everything vulnerable, getting all these crit strike damages against these vulnerable things is absolutely huge. Crit strike damage right now is very overtuned, and you do tons of damage with it. I'm going to conclude this video by showing off what happens whenever you come across a boss. Now, I'm going to let the whole thing roll, and what you're going to see here is, as this is going, 8 total Hammer of the Ancients is all it took to kill a boss that is level 89 in an ancestral dungeon, nightmare dungeon, that's tier 35. That should give you a concept of how much damage that this build can put out. And unfortunately, there wasn't even the big damage 3 million crit during that boss fight. So it's just an absolute beater of a build. I really love it. I think it's one you'll really, really enjoy. Go ahead and let me know in the comment section below what you're feeling about this. Or have you tried this and you're already struggling with it? Is there certain points in the build that you're really struggling with? Is it an aspect? Whatever it is, go ahead and let me know. I will do my absolute best to help you out. We've already done this with our Blood Necro build, which you can find linked at the end of this video. You can find all my guides at the end of the video, so please go ahead and check those out. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Have a good one, and take care.